So a very warm welcome to all of you this morning. Thank you for joining us on our EAPO webinar series on queer trans seniors. We're so happy to see all of you. Patrick Slaney, I want to say hello. Thank you. You have been our volunteer for more than 15 years now, 15 years. And you know that you helped get this thing off the ground, so thank you. My name is Christine Chan. I work as prevention consultant for the GTA for Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario. For those of you still in your pajamas or beachwear, do not fear. We cannot see you and we cannot hear you. Want to let you know that the webinar will be recorded and posted on EAPO's website, eapon.ca. We're delighted all the webinars this week. We will have sign language interpretation. Christopher Chiarelli is doing his thing beside me, hopefully in a window box near you. Micheline Paul tomorrow and Thursday, she'll be doing sign language in French. For Q&A, please type your questions in the Q&A box. We have Mary Shakuri, my colleague, who is the Q&A queen for today. Mary, can you say hello?
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Looking forward to this amazing webinar today. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. And then the chat box is where you go to put comments and insights that you want to share with everyone. An evaluation survey will be sent to you after the webinar, so please fill that out because we really appreciate it. So this week's webinar series has been made possible by a wonderful collaboration between Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario, FARFO, and Senior Pride Network. Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario is a provincial organization funded by the Ministry for Seniors and Accessibility. We're focused on raising awareness on elder abuse and neglect. We do this through public education sessions. We do this through professional training and service coordination. In this large group today here, we have my Executive Director, Marta Hayek, and my Director of Partnerships, Rayanne Rideout. They've been directing this webinar series planning every step of the way. FARFO is the voice for Francophone seniors 50 and older in Ontario. They do a wonderful job providing education, social support against social isolation, and cultural programs. You'll see in a video box next to me, we've got Olivier Lechapt. Olivier, can you say hello?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Olivier's beautiful voice, you'll hear more of it. Tomorrow, tune in for the French version. Tuesday and Thursday, he's the host. Senior Pride Network, for Lion King fans out there, this is not Simba's older relatives. It is a network of volunteer-run, it's a volunteer-run network of people and organizations who are all focused on expanding programs and services to queer trans seniors in the city of Toronto. So together, the three organizations have come together to begin a real effort to prevent abuse in the queer trans scene. So we're doing a lot of work together. Like next month, we will also be having a two-spirit conversation about respecting elders. And we hope that you will join us not only for today, not only for this week, but in the future as well. This week, though, we've got a wonderful series of webinars, Monday and Tuesday. So today and tomorrow, same topic, understanding the wide diversity of queer trans communities. Anthony's doing it today. Carlos is doing it en français tomorrow. Thursday is International Day of Older Persons. We'll have Carmen Paquette. She'll be doing elder abuse in queer trans communities. And Friday, I'm happy to say Anthony is back, this time with Heather Hay, and they're doing elder abuse in queer trans communities. We would love to interact with you, so tweet us. We are on Facebook, email us. And right now, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to the multi-sided diamond that is Anthony Mohamed. Anthony is the Education Chair at Senior Pride Network. He has been at St. Mike's Hospital since 1995. He is the Senior Specialist for Equity and Community Engagement, Quality and Performance. He has more than 30 years of experience in community and social justice. You know, Anthony has so many hats. He's a facilitator, a mediator, a policy person, a researcher, a project manager. And I'm glad to say that whatever hat he's wearing, he's always using an anti-oppression intersectional framework. He's held leadership positions such as Equity Strategic Plan with Toronto Central Inn. He was Equity Policy Manager at Ministry of Long-Term Care. He's done queer trans training for Toronto Police. He's had so many awards. A couple are Excellence in Equity, Caring Hands Award from Ontario AIDS Network. And it's just stunning how much he's packed into his work life that I can't actually understand how he has the time and energy to be traveling around the world, because he tells me he has lived in, traveled, and worked in 7 continents of the world. And yes, folks, there are only 7 continents in the world. So he's literally been everywhere. Anthony can communicate in English, en français, en espagnol. He has a wicked sense of humor, sometimes a little bit naughty and spicy for me. After all these years, I'm still enjoying getting to know Anthony. He's full of surprises. The other day, I was surprised when I found out he has a master's in environmental studies. So let me introduce Anthony for you. Welcome, Anthony, and we cannot wait to hear what you have to say.
Thank you so much. I'm unmuted.
Thank you so much, Christine, and thanks to all the people who pull this together. And thank you to all the participants. I can't believe watching the numbers go up. It's making me more and more nervous, but I'm grateful for all the support that I have around me from the folks. So why don't we jump right in? And I'm going to start sharing my screen. Welcome. Oh, that's not the screen. Let me see. Where is it? If I can, let me stop the video. And let's see if we can share the screen. There we go. And the screen is being shared. So good morning, everyone. As Christine so gracefully presented, my name's Anthony Mohamed, and I'm the chair of the Education Committee at the Senior Pride Network. And the Senior Pride Network, its primary goal is really making sure that LGBTQ seniors from all the diversities of our community, which you'll learn about today, are well treated no matter which service they're accessing. So as a result, we do a lot of advocacy work, and I've been a member for about over 20 years, so since the founding. And one of the reasons I got involved when I was actually quite young was because I cared so much about how older adults and senior adults are being treated in Ontario. So let's start this session with a bit of an acknowledgement. So where I am right now is in the city of Toronto, and it's the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, Métis, settler, and newcomer communities. And we all now have the responsibilities of caretakers of this land. I'd also like to throw in a little bit of education around the land acknowledgement, and that Toronto sits on what's considered Treaty 13. And that's a treaty that was done between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. This treaty began in 1787. And it wasn't settled for more than 200 years later, until 200 years later in 2010. And the financial part of the settlement was 145 million, but there were lots more trusts build up as a result. Anyway, I think it's important that we understand which treaty we're on wherever we are in Canada. So I would encourage you to look into what treaty you're in and see where it's at and what kind of issues affect Indigenous peoples as we continue with this reconciliation process across Canada. So what you will learn today. So the focus is introducing the LGBTQ communities. I want to start off off the bat and saying, you know, within 40 minutes to an hour, we're definitely not going to cover all the issues that impact LGBTQ communities in Ontario, but hopefully this will be a very good introduction for you, especially for people who are not so familiar with queer and trans communities. So we're going to understand what the long, sometimes referred to alphabet soup refers to. The 2SLGBTIQQA is the current acronym letters. However, those letters may change. We'll look at a brief history of queer and trans rights in Ontario. And while we're doing that, I encourage you in the chat I'm sure there's many people who have own memories or their own experiences. I encourage you to share those experiences or share those in bullet form, in point form, in the chat about things that I may not be covering myself. We'll look at a bit of statistics around some recent studies that was done, hopefully presenting a bit of a community profile so you can understand. And then we'll wrap up with some related resources. As we go forward, feel free to ask questions, feel free to contribute to the chat, have respectful discussion with each other and in the chat. Unfortunately, I'm not able personally to look at the chat while I'm presenting, so I'll rely on my colleagues to point out any questions or issues as we continue. So let's get started. I'd like to start with a bit of poll, and I'm not sure if the polls are set up, so I'll rely on Christine. But throughout, my personal style is much more in a in-person workshop, so I'm quite unfamiliar with this technology of managing Zoom meetings. That's why I'm so blessed to have all the support around me. But we're going to try to make it as interactive as possible. So I already mentioned the chat, but throughout the webinar, we'll have some polls spread out, and these are completely anonymous with no link back to you. So it doesn't matter what you answer. But there's almost 500 people who have signed up for this webinar, which kind of freaked me out when Christine sent me the numbers. And I was like, I can't believe it. But anyway, I'm really grateful that so many people are interested in this topic. And of course, you're not forced to answer or to contribute to the chat or anything. Do what is comfortable for you as an individual. All right, so let's continue. So while I'm going to start with a bit of a video, and this was a news report that was done for the CBC, and I thought it gave us good context, and it provided a voice for older queer and trans seniors. So let's get started.
My name, well, David Bisdell. And who am I? Well, I'm an older gay man. I'm having a hard time, I guess, making that transition from being young to being old. When I'm dreaming, I'm young. In my dreams, I'm young.
When you look in the mirror, what do you see?
I see an old man. I see somebody that I didn't want to become. I'm not afraid of dying. What I'm afraid of is the time from now until the time that I do die. And the way I see it right now, going into a senior's home, it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be any fun.
I mean, do you worry that people might treat you differently because you're gay?
I do. And I think it would be unjustified.
What is the worry?
Isolation. That they won't accept me.
Imagine feeling that at the end of your life. Now, one of the problems, and seniors will tell you this, is that you become more and more invisible as you age. That's why Leslie Lee Camp does whatever she can to be seen.
I'm a very proud queer dyke, as you can see. I wear my dyke t-shirt proudly. And this is my buddy Lily, who goes everywhere with me, especially, I want to show you, on the dance floor.
Leslie is a youthful 64. And one of the things Lily, her cane, does for her is remind Leslie of the time she spent in a Toronto rehab hospital a couple of years ago.
This one nurse came in and said to me, "Look at you, you're a mess. It's bad enough that you're one of those, and now I have to come and clean you up." And it was humiliating because I had no control and I had to totally depend on her. And for the whole time she was cleaning me, she kept making homophobic remarks. Kept saying, you know, you don't have a husband, you don't have children, where do you think you're gonna go in life? It's bringing tears to my eyes just thinking about it. If I'm there for good health care, it shouldn't matter who I am, right? What my sexual orientation is. That shouldn't matter when you're providing me health care.
Listening to Leslie, I can't help but wonder, why aren't LGBT seniors protesting? Well, Leslie points out that it wasn't until 1969 that it was even legal to be gay in this country. So if you're 70 years old today, you remember that.
Many of us are afraid because we have been so stigmatized for so many years at this age. Those of us who are 55 and 60 plus are still afraid to speak out. We are people just like everybody else, but we have led such stressful lives, and some of us still do. We don't have the support systems that straight seniors have in place. And that's why we are going back into the closet.
After struggling to come out, LGBT seniors get to the end of their lives and face a horrible choice.
We are having to decide whether we want to come out and be our whole selves, or we want to get good health care.
Would you ever go back into the closet?
Never. Never. Nope. It's going to be a fight to the end.
But here's the thing. Leslie's not fighting by herself.
Over the years, many of people in our LGBT community have been wounded. They've been wounded because they've been discriminated against.
That's Brian Hobbs. He's 69, retired, and his passion today is to make people aware of the discrimination that LGBT seniors face going into care. Everyone in this seminar either works or volunteers with seniors.
They might feel threatened to come here and be part of things. Or they might hide. They might pretend to be straight and they're not.
The reason Brian does this is deeply personal. And it actually starts way back in high school, when he was left to eat alone in the cafeteria every day.
Nobody looked at me, not even the teachers. They'd walk past, and it's like I didn't exist. What if the same thing happened in a residence? What if people didn't welcome me at their table? What if I was the one who sat alone at a table in the corner of the room at 79? So that happened to me when I was a teenager, but I sure don't want it to happen again when I'm a senior and in care.
In the seminar, to help workers understand that fear, Brian uses an anecdote that happened just a few months ago.
I had some friends who were an elderly gay couple around 80 years old, and eventually one of them became ill and had to be placed in a long-term care facility. And one of the things they asked me was that, could you stand in the doorway? And if a personal service worker or a nurse would go by, signal us, because we don't want to be seen holding hands or embracing, on the bed. Because they were afraid if the nurses caught them doing that, they would discriminate against them. People will sometimes say to us, okay, so what do you gays want? And what we want is to be treated with the same dignity and respect and kindness that is accorded to everybody else. Nothing more than that, but nothing less. So thank you for listening.
Brian's hope is pretty simple, that LGBT seniors can be whoever they want to be when they go into long-term care.
Would you ever go back into the closet?
No. I'd just be who I am. I'm not flamboyant. I'm not one that I don't think I'm one that you can pick out on the street and say he's a fag. I just feel normal, except that I'm gay.
The seniors who are facing what David's up against are the same seniors who fought for gay rights for all generations. It seems only fair. They should live how they want in their final years. Nick Purden, CBC News, Toronto.
And this issue may only get bigger as...
How do I go back to there? Oops, I don't know what's going on there. Anyway, oops, let's go backwards. Sorry about that. Hi, everybody. So that was a bit of an introduction, and when people were speaking about their own experiences with being a queer and trans senior, I'd like to share a little bit about myself too. I was born in Trinidad and Tobago, and I came here in the late 1960s. I know I look quite young, but I'm actually quite old. And I came out in the very early 80s, so around 81, 82, and got heavily involved in the community and the rights movement by 1983. And of course, HIV had hit at that time. And so many people who were doing LGBT rights work also started doing AIDS care and AIDS advocacy. So that's a little bit about my background. However, my focus career-wise and throughout my life has been about equity. So anti-racism, anti-sexism, ageism, ableism, all the isms. And that's kind of the focus that I've had. But let's start with a bit of an introduction of the letters that make up the community currently. So the first one is the 2S, the Two-Spirit. And this refers to many indigenous communities across North America or Turtle Island, refer to people who are LGBTQ as having two spirits, both a male and a female spirit. And many people who, within the community who are of an indigenous background, they may or may not use the term two-spirit to identify themselves. It's important to understand that not all indigenous LGBTQ people identify with the term two-spirit, but many do, and many have embraced that. And then, as Christine has mentioned, there'll be a two-spirit and older adults webinar coming up. So I hope that you can join us for that. The next one is lesbian and gay, the next two. So lesbian refers to people who have romantic and sexual relationships. So women who have romantic or sexual relationships with other women. And when I say women or men, when I'm using that, I'm talking about women identified. So a person may be a trans woman as well in this context. Similarly with gay, it's about men who have romantic or sexual relationships with other men. Bisexual is an older term, but it's still very much used. It refers to people who can have romantic or sexual relationships with people of all genders. Another term that's similar to bisexual is pansexual. And that's meant to be inclusive of all the different gender identities that are out there. Transgender is the next one, and this is an umbrella term, so it sometimes can get confusing. With umbrella terms, many things fall under it. So words like genderqueer, even drag kings and drag queens, transsexuals. So these are people who believe their true identity, their true gender identity does not match the gender identity that was assigned to them at birth, right? And as a result, they may or may not appear in a different, in more traditional dress according to the gender that they identify with, and they may or may not change anything physically. So that may or may not, pretty darn important. right? Because not all transgender people appear differently than the gender that they present, and it's up to them however they present. And then the next one is intersex. And intersex, this is a newer term, but the old term for this community is hermaphrodite. And hermaphrodite refers to Hermes and Aphrodite, who in Greek mythology had a child who was both male and female. However, intersex, again, is a bit of an umbrella term that can refer to anyone that's born with either chromosomes or genitalia that is non-specific or not characteristic of traditional male and female physical parts. And as a result, they may or may not choose to identify as one of the various genders that are available to them, or they may change that both physically and in appearance as they grow older. So queer is the next word, and this is a term that has been reclaimed. Obviously, when I was young, queer was a term that was quite derogatory, and it's been reclaimed by the community, starting with the rights movements in the 80s. We had a group called Queer Nation in Ontario that used to advocate, and as a result of that reclamation, many people identify with the term queer, but it's important to understand that not everyone does. Some people are still very much uncomfortable. Questioning is fairly obvious. These are people who are questioning their sexuality or their gender identity. And then allies refers to people who are heterosexual or cisgender. So heterosexual are people who tend to have romantic and sexual relationships with a gender other than their own identity. And cisgender refers to people like myself. I'm a cisgender male who identify with gender that they were assigned at birth. So I was assigned male, and as a result, my pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm very comfortable being a cisgender male. However, but I think it's important that we think of our gender in that term, like when did you realize you were cisgender, or when do you realize that you're transgender? And I know that that's a newer topic for many people on the video. I encourage you to continue your learning. The other thing that I want to identify here is the understanding of the difference between sexuality and gender identity. And they are two different things, although they're often lumped in together. So lesbian, gay, and bisexual refers to your and heterosexual refers to your sexuality. Your sexuality is who you choose to form romantic or sexual relationships with. Your gender identity is separate from that, and it's about your own process of understanding who you are as an individual and how you present to the world. And that could be very fluid. It could change over time, or it could be very stagnant, where you know who you are in terms of your gender identity, and that's who you will be comfortable with for the rest of your life. But they're two separate things when it comes to, and I think that's important that you understand that. So a trans man, for example, could be a heterosexual trans man, where he then forms relationships with other genders who are not men, right? So that's important to kind of understand. I'm not sure why the screen is showing the former slide in the middle of it, but anyway. And then when it comes to identifying who are seniors, many of the groups within our communities, they define seniors or older LGBTQ adults as being anywhere between 45 and 60 plus. So prime timers, for example, which is a group for older gay men in Toronto, their starting age is 45. And at the Senior Pride Network, we don't define the age. It's whoever cares about seniors issues are welcome to join our group. That's just an example. All right, so a note about language. Like all language, it will continue to evolve. Some same gender loving people or trans people do not identify with any of the labels that we just reviewed. Queer is now widely used, especially in academia, to reflect queer and trans studies. And words like queer, dyke, fag, and tranny, even though they have been used in the past to be very derogatory, many people have reclaimed this. However, I do want to emphasize that not everyone is comfortable with these words or with identifying and claiming it for themselves. And when unsure of a person's pronouns, for example, or about how they identify, it's always best to ask that individual. And it's important that we look at each person as an individual, as opposed to lumping the community under one umbrella. We are extremely diverse as far as our faith, our political leanings, our colors, our body shapes, our ages, in terms of the community. And it's important to treat everyone as an individual, not as a spokesperson for the broader community. And then our job as individuals who care about others is to respect how they would like to be referred to. So if somebody tells you that their pronouns are they or them, it's important to identify and to use those terms as well as you can, right? I know that it can be difficult sometimes, and I think most people understand when it's a struggle, but it's a struggle coming from a place of love as opposed to a place of maliciousness. All right, so and just a note on those polls. I got a message during the video that we're unable to do the polls throughout the webinar. So my plan is to do 5 polls. How about we do 5 polls now, just to get started, and then we'll do 5 at the end. So I'm going to stop the video for a second, my feed. Okay. And we'll start the polls. At least I think we will. We're just, I'm relying on the folks who know technology better than I.
So I believe, can you see the polls?
No.
I'm just going to share my screen. Oh, yes, they can see the polls.
Oh, they.
Are you able to vote?
Yes, we are.
You're able to vote. Thank you. Please, Olivier. Oh, great. Thank you for voting. Keep voting, guys.
The first question. Yeah. Looks like some people can see them and some people can't.
A lot of voting now. So 19, 20, 23. There's 280 of us in this webinar, which is wonderful. We're just going to wait because there's 35, 38, 40. 55. Keep voting. Thank you. For those who can't see them, just try to scroll down. There are 10 of them, and you're all voting on 10.
Oh, I thought we were going to do 5.
Anthony, my apologies.
Yes, the last one, I recognize that some of the questions is an evaluation question. Please, that was supposed to go at the end. So our apologies for that.
Yeah. But Anthony is encouraging that people are already feeling that they have a better understanding.
Oh, good.
Even at this
Glad
point.
to hear that.
But
unfortunately, I can't see the chat or your comments. So, and my strength is actually facilitation, where I can see the audience and be in tune with your facial reactions and your questions. So I apologize if the style is a bit off.
I would like to add, if people want to submit their vote, they have to vote for every question, including the first one, even if this one is not well placed in the polling.
Thank you, Olivier. And we see 172 out of 280 have voted. So keep going. People are still voting.
No, I can't see anything.
190 people have voted now. It's still going, so people are still voting. There will be another evaluation survey coming out to you in your inbox after this webinar. Please do take the time to fill that in. We're interested in your comments because we want to improve and do more. Okay, I think we've got 202 out of 276 voted. Anthony, would you like to see the results now? Or?
Sure, that would be great. I can't, but I don't know if other people on the webinar can. Can you see the results now? I see a blank screen. Do other people see them, like the participants? That's more important. Oh, here we go. All right. Oh, I saw them for a second. That's okay. I stopped. It's okay. Christine, maybe you can read out the results. That would be great.
That's a great idea. Thank you, Anthony. And I apologize, Anthony. It's on me. The polling is my job. Okay, so 54% are based in a medium city. 27% in a big city. So I think most of us are urban folk because that's about 80% of us, with only 21% from a rural area. The age group of all the participants, we've got a lot of people within almost half are younger than 45 years old. We've only got 8% over 65. So we have a lot of younger folk today. And wonderful to see under 25. We have 10% of participants under 25. So queer trans communities, about 78% do not identify as queer or trans.
Wow.
17% do, and 5% are unsure. Providing direct services to seniors, 83% do. So we have a lot of care and service providers with us. Wonderful. 14% do not. Are you comfortable with queer and trans people in social and professional situations? Yes, 93% say yes, they are comfortable. Are you a member of a racialized non-white group? No, 77% said no. Yes, for 21%. At what age did you become aware of your true gender identity? 59% said under 10 years old. Under 10 years old. People who became aware of their true gender identity in their teens, 28%. And then 14% over 20. Do you have a visible or invisible disability? No for 77%. Yes for 22%. Do you feel you could help an older queer trans person in a respectful manner? Yes for 93%, unsure for 6%. Very interesting, isn't it, Anthony? Over to you.
Very, very interesting. I'm very impressed that so many people participated, and thank you for sharing. Also, there were some surprising results. Like, I'm impressed that so many people work with seniors directly who are on this webinar and are showing interest in here. But also the diversity of the people that are on this webinar. And we're a relatively small number, you know, just over 200 people replied to the polling questions, and it showed significant diversity in terms of age, in terms of disability, in terms of people of color. So it's important to understand that even though we're such a small number, 200, imagine the larger community of queer and trans people, how diverse that is. So we're a reflection of the society, and I think that that's very important. So now I'm going to go back to sharing the screen and share. All right. So we're going to look at a little bit of queer and trans history. And I'd like to talk about the Gay Purge. And I know that this is a term that may or may not be familiar for you, but around the late 1950s, early 1960s, there were systemic policies in place within the federal government that lasted all the way up until the 90s. So this period was referred to as the Gay Purge. And what happened was people who worked for government services, in the armed services, so military services, and police, federal police, so RCMP, they were found to be LGBTQ. They were squeezed out as undesirables of the state. And it's very interesting because this lasted for a very long time. And it affects a person's psyche when they're told that they're undesirable just as a result of their sexuality or gender identity. And so I wanted to include something like that because I wanted you to know that that there's been systemic homophobia and transphobia in Canada that does exist, and that it took a lot of advocacy and effort from thousands of people across Canada to make these changes happen. And only recently did Justin Trudeau apologize for the Gay Purge. And there's a committee in the Ottawa area who are planning to do a permanent memorial to victims of the Gay Purge and other homophobic or transphobic discrimination. So you can kind of keep your eyes out for that. It's at this point too that I'd like you to encourage you to share in the chat any kind of items of queer and trans history that you think others should know about. And like I said, we're only scratching the surface, so please continue to learn. So on December 21st, 1968, Pierre Elliott Trudeau did a famous media interview where he said that there was no place for the state in the bedrooms of the nations, in the bedrooms of the nation. And on June 27th, 1969, that resulted in a vote that essentially removed the term homosexuality or from the criminal code. So therefore it was decriminalized. However, discrimination didn't stop, nor did other laws not come into effect that continued to discriminate against LGBTQ people. And like I said, even the Gay Purge policies, they weren't changed as a result of this. All it meant was that a person couldn't be locked up and thrown in jail instantly for under the criminal code for being LGBT. Around that same time in June 1969 was something that is seen around the world as the start of the modern LGBTQ rights movement. And this was in Greenwich Village in Manhattan in New York City. And there was a bar called the Stonewall Inn. And the Stonewall Inn still exists as a bar. However, it did move locations. But at the time, the Stonewall Inn was basically a hole in the wall. It was a bar, like most gay bars at the time. They were run by the mafia and managed by the mafia, and it did also had issues with the liquor license. So under the liquor license laws, police took the advantage of harassing LGBTQ people regularly and bar owners. So they would enter, and often what would happen is they would arrest everyone in the bar, and then the next day, the New York Times would print all the names of people who were arrested the night before. And as a result, people's families broke up, their lives were ruined, many people lost their jobs. Anyway, one night at the end of June 1969, mostly trans women of color, so drag queens and drag kings, very what we would consider butch looking women, they were the ones who said enough is enough. And then the whole community kind of came together that night and they rioted against the arrests at the Stonewall Inn. And as a result of the Stonewall riots being at the end of June, that's why many prides around the world tend to happen at the end of June, not just because it's summer in the Northern Hemisphere, it's also because of the Stonewall riots. So soon after that, in 1971 to 1973, across Canada, from Vancouver to Halifax and St. John's, there were the first gay prides and protest marches in Canada. And this article to the right, this newspaper article, is a gay picnic that happened on Toronto Island, so Hanlan's Point Beach, in 1971. And it's important that we acknowledge that as a result of events like that gay picnic and the prides and protests of people before us is why we're so comfortable talking about these issues today. So like I said, but her widespread arrests and harassment, the relationship with the Toronto police was not very good. I remember clearly myself walking down Yonge Street, especially during Halloween, and being there were people throwing eggs at us all the time, and harassment. I was myself personally, I was queer bashed in 1987. And just for wearing a pink triangle. And a pink triangle is a symbol that was used during Nazi Germany to identify gay prisoners. There were many different symbols among the prisoner group during the Nazi regime's reign during the war and in the camps. And I'm sure, obviously, the largest group were Jewish people, and many millions of people were killed. But what they did was they took the Star of David, which was the symbol for Jewish prisoners, on a yellow background, and they took the down-facing triangle and they colorized it for different prisoners. And there were two categories that impacted LGBTQ people specifically. One was the black triangle, which there was a category under the prisoner categories that was called antisocial women. And antisocial women were often women who were lesbian. And as a result, the black triangle is another symbol that has been reclaimed as liberation. And gay men in Europe at the time were given the pink triangle, so the downward facing. And for example, some symbols would be merged. So if you were Jewish and a gay man, you would have the Star of David on a yellow background, but the down-facing triangle would be pink. And there's a wonderful play and movie called Bent that reflects pink triangle prisoners. Anyway, and then continuing along in February 1981, which is considered the start of the Canadian modern rights movement, was something called the Toronto Bathhouse raids. And the bathhouse were places where you go to get clean, but it was also a place where places where a lot of gay men could meet and perhaps have sex, but also be very social. And anyway, the Toronto Police Services decided to raid a number of the bathhouses in February 91. And there was this spontaneous uproar within the community. And people gathered at the corner of Yonge and Wellesley quite spontaneously as a result of the bathhouse raids. And it very much was a trigger for people to advocate more for change and for a better relationship with police, which of course we're still working on today. Let's continue. Uh-oh, there we go. Okay, so a few more community milestones. So from the 80s till present, the community has been impacted significantly by HIV and AIDS. I remember at the beginning of HIV, I honestly, I was going to funerals once a month. And there was only one, uh, uh, funeral home that would accept bodies of people who had died of HIV. So it was a horrible, horrible time. I can't spend too much time because I see the time is moving on, but in 1985, Ken Zeller, who was a librarian with the Toronto District School Board, he was murdered in High Park, and High Park is a large park on the side of Toronto. And why this is important is because as a result of his murder, it led to a number of changes, legislated changes, because the discussion had become quite loud. And oddly enough, I know HIV/AIDS is a horrible tragedy, and we lost an entire generation of gay men. As a result of HIV and AIDS being on the news every day, the issue of LGBTQ people were on the news and were present almost daily. Anyway, Ken Zeller, he was murdered by 5 high school students, 5 boys in high school. 3 of those boys were in my class. And and when Toronto Life did an interview with me in 1985, I remember one of the questions they asked me was, were these boys normal? And I have to say, yes, they were normal, because it was very normal for young teenage boys to get drunk and go beat up a fag, quote unquote. So but just because it was normal doesn't mean that it was right. Anyway, like I said, it led to a number of protections. So in 1986, the Ontario Human Rights Commission added sexual orientation to the Ontario Human Rights Code. And in 1996, so 10 years later, the Canadian Human Rights Act added sexual orientation to that act. Gender identity, however, took a little bit longer, and gender identity and expression was added in 2012 to the Ontario Human Rights Code and in 2007 to the Canadian Human Rights Act. Same gender marriage, 2003 in Ontario and 2005 across Canada. But there are still some issues today. So healthcare inequities, so things like the blood ban. So there's a difference between everyone else and gay men. The amount of time that you could not have had sex prior to donating blood. So that's one issue. Trans people and intersex access to the healthcare that they need is another big issue. Banning conversion therapy across Canada. Oop, I spelled therapy wrong. That was just my mistake. And of course, issues of aging, which is affecting our entire population across Canada, but especially so for LGBTQ seniors. Social family acceptance remains an issue, and of course, reducing discrimination. But the focus right now is intersectional and international oppression. So by intersectional, I mean things like all the identities that we bring to the table. So myself as a gay man, I bring that identity, but I'm also a brown man and I bring that identity. And I'm a man who's older, so I bring that identity. So all of us have multiple identities, and it's important that we recognize them. So that term intersectional, that's referring to. And then the international oppression focuses the belief that Canada has a responsibility to ensure that queer and trans people around the world are well treated. So we're going to review a few statistics very quickly, and I just want to say they rarely reflect true diversity. Researchers' bias may be present. Remember that we're a very diverse community and that we live in all urban and rural areas. So here's some statistics from a foundation in Montreal that interviewed people across Canada, and I just want to point out a few of these. So 13% of the Canadian population identify as queer as trans. But the next one is very interesting. More than half of these people are not out at work. And that makes me wonder why. Like, is it because that they're not comfortable? Is it because that their workplace is not welcoming? Is it because of discrimination, or is it just because they choose not to come out? Right. So all those questions arise for me. All right. Other things that I'd like to point out is 81% say they feel distressed, lonely, isolated, or discouraged due to their queer and trans identities. And I'm not sure what that's about, because there has to be deeper questions around that. Like, what are the reasons? And of course, queer and trans people of color face compound discrimination based on racism, cultural, faith bias, both within the community and their own communities. So there seems to be a bit of a divide there. But the good, encouraging news is more than half of Canadians are comfortable with queer and trans people. This was a values slide that was presented by EGAL. It was a survey that was done, and EGAL is a national LGBTQ rights organization, and they did an online survey, but during COVID, so it's a very recent survey, and it gives you an idea of the types of issues. And it's interesting that Canada as a whole and LGBT people, we all care about healthcare. Healthcare seems to be the #1 issue across Canada for everyone. But social issues and Indigenous issues seems to be a little bit higher within queer and trans communities compared to the rest of Canada. Not that those things are not important to the rest of Canada. They just seem to be more on people's minds within the LGBTQ communities. All right, I'm going to wrap up shortly, but so my apologies if you have to run away. I know that we're getting very close to time. But I do want to point out the difference between equality and equity. With equality, we're talking about sameness, treating everyone the same, removing difference. That's the problem with equality, is that it's a great goal, but it assumes that we're all starting at a level playing field. And the reality is we're not, right? So as a result, systemic power differentials may be ignored, thereby contributing to discrimination. What we're aiming for, however, is equity, where we actually recognize the differences amongst people. And that's all of our identities. And every one of us on this webinar, we all have our identities that we feel is very much a part of us. And so what we want to be treated is fairly according to those differences. So we need to acknowledge and respect difference and treat people accordingly. And that this little picture that I found on the internet, I thought it was a good demonstration of the difference between equality and equity. With equity, everybody gets a box that is suited to their own individual identities in order that we all get to reach for the apple. All right. So here are some resources as I wrap up. So the first of all is the 3 groups that are presenting these webinars. One is Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario. The other one is FARFO, la Fédération des Aînes et des Retraites francophones de l'Ontario. And the last, of course, is the Senior Pride Network based here in Toronto. Here are some other resources, and you'll have access to these slides. So as a result, you don't need to scribble too much, but I'll point out a few of them. Actually, the one that I really want to point out, oddly enough, is the last one, and that's a global news link, but it has 4 videos that I thought were excellent in terms of giving you a good overview of the community as it currently is, as well as some historic information around Stonewall and the rights movement. But of course, there are other resources around Ontario. And that's where I'm going to wrap up and pass it back to Christine to wrap up. All right, so I'd like to thank you all for joining me. My apologies about the time being so tight, but I'd like to thank my colleagues for inviting me to present these slides to you. All my best.
So wonderful presentation. Thank you so much, Anthony. I would like to give you all permission to log off, but to also stay on, because we've made an executive decision to stay on for another 10 to 15 minutes. If you're okay with that, Anthony?
Yes, I'm fine.
And we're going to be going through the comments in the chat box. Thank you all for sharing, as well as the Q&A box. So Mary Shakuri, I invite you to turn on your video and summarize the chat comments for us, please. Is Mary there? Maybe I'll start with doing the Q&A questions. Anthony's very interesting. We have very good points here in the Q&A section. Elizabeth Podnieks is with us. She said, please do stress that we need real interventions for awareness and education for older people. We have a comment from XJ Ng, who said that, the A in the acronym, the 2SLGBTIQQA acronym, it stands for ACE, asexual, aromantic, and it's often erased in the acronym in favor of allies. Bonnie is asking, is queer and trans acceptable to most of the communities? A short version of the current acronym is needed for better use by the average person.
Yes, and as a result, and as I mentioned, language will continue to evolve, and many people are comfortable with the short version of queer and trans, but not everyone, and that's just a reality that there's no one umbrella term that kind of reduces the all of the titles that are out there. And I would like to address the asexual. Yes, I agree. I should have put a double A in that list. So that was on me, and my apologies to asexual participants on here. And for people who are listening in, asexual refers to people who have a reduced need, or a reduced desire to form relationships, both romantic or sexual, with anyone of any gender, right? And sometimes they're considered part of the broader LGBTQ communities, and sometimes they identify independently of. But I can certainly add that A. Thank you for that.
Some good comments from Denita. Can you elaborate on how and when we use they and them?
Sorry, you're muted, Christine.
So they and them, like most terms, refer to when you're unsure of the gender. It's a good time to use they or them. But also, if a person identifies as they or them, that's when you use they or them. So it's about a broader movement of using non-gender specific language. So for example, if you're asking a person about their partner as opposed to their husband or wife, That might be a good start. Unless you know that they've already identified as having a husband or wife, and they're comfortable with that language, then you use that language. But it's part of a broader movement, the they or them. Individuals can identify as a number of terms, and he, him, she, her, they or them are just three of them, three of the terms, but there are many others. And so, like I said during that slide, it's best to ask when you're not comfortable. And if you don't know and you're referring to a group of people or an individual, it's best to use they or them.
Some wonderful reflection from Jackie. Jackie, I love it when people are so frank and open about their reflection. Jackie says, my best friend is a gay minister. He married me and my husband. I always thought about the issues. I thought I was not a good enough ally. My heart hurts so much right now. We all need to try harder. This is not acceptable. Thanks for this. This needs to be mandatory training in all Canadian agencies.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much for your comments. And also, I'm looking over the chat room, and thank you very much for people who participated and people who shared information. So thank you about that.
Mary, are you able to be on now? I think we're having a few technical issues, but I wanted to just look at the chat. I know, Anthony, you can look at the chats, but you can see that we've had a lot of wonderful comments about your presentation, people wishing that it was longer, few constructive criticism. We're always open. We know we are not perfect. We're really trying to do better. And thank you so much for all the comments, good, bad, and ugly. With the chat box, Olivier, is there anything you want to point out? Oh, Mary is here. Mary, take over, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, technical difficulties.
Mary, yes, you seem to be on mute.
Oh. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me, Anthony?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you, Mary. Go ahead.
Perfect. Okay. So from the chat, I know we had some anniversaries, so we wanted to shout out for Wendy, her 1-year anniversary. A lot of positive after yes saying that legalized marriage has been 17 years. So congratulations to both of you. And a lot of chat requests and response saying there needs to be more training, further training. So something I know the FARFO and EAPON team will look at in the future as well, most definitely. And very many positive comments about Anthony's presentation. Your style and your skill sets have been really appreciated by all the panelists and participants today.
Great.
Olivier, I wonder if you have any reflections to offer, because you've been monitoring the chat too.
No, nothing to add. Mary has summarized well the chat box, and we addressed most of the questions in the Q&A section. So nothing to say except congratulations, guys. This webinar was wonderful.
Thank you, wonderful. So remember, everyone, the webinar and the slide deck will be available on the EAPON website. Do contact me if you want the link for this Friday's presentation. Anthony will be back with Heather Hay to talk about the very important topic of elder abuse in 2SLGBTIQQA communities. Anthony, thank you for your time. I know you've prepared, you spent a lot of time thinking about what to say today. It's hard to have a perfect presentation, but you did so well. Thank you so much. And thank you all for logging on, and look forward to seeing you in the other webinars this week. Remember, we have the French ones hosted by Olivier tomorrow at 11 with Carlos. Thursday, elder abuse hosted again by Olivier in French, and then Friday, Anthony's back. Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.